I can't leave the house. I can't take a few steps without kind of rolling. How are you? You can't do one without
Good afternoon, everyone. It is 1:30. We will call to order the, March 28th meeting of the Board of Directors of the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency. I ask everyone to please rise, and Robert, would you lead us in the pledge?
Put your hand over your heart. Please say along with me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, roll call, please.
Chair West?
Yes.
Director Aranio?
Here.
Director Craven?
Here.
Director Borchard?
Here.
Agenda review, I take it there are no changes?
No changes.
Okay, this is an opportunity now for public comments on matters not otherwise on the board's agenda. I will, since we're anticipating, not necessarily today, but in future, considerably more comments than we've seen in the recent past, the board will impose the 5-minute limit on public comments, both on non-agenda and agenda items. So with that, any public comments on matters not otherwise on today's agenda? Hearing none, we'll move forward to board member comments. Robert?
None.
Just one, and it's a comment. I want to remind everyone that the deadline for posting comments with respect to the draft GSPs are out there is rapidly approaching. I think the deadline is the 3rd. Is that correct? All right. That having been said, I had asked staff to make sure, I assume this is part of the plan as well. I've seen some comments come already. I'm sure we'll see more in the next few days. I want to make sure that all those comments get posted. Okay, all right. That having been said, let's move on to the consent agenda, unless there are any changes or someone wants to pull something off the consent agenda. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, moving on then to item number 4, the AMI incentive implementation contract. While Arnie's approaching, I just noticed, I saw Mike here. Oh, I said Mike Mobley's out there, and Andy Waters just walked in as well.
Neil Andrews.
Neil Andrews back there as well. Thank you for raising your hand, Neil. I wouldn't have seen you otherwise. Thank you. You want to go right ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair West, directors, Arnie Anselm, staff to the GMA. This item is the contract with the vendor who will supply and install the AMI under the Water Market Grant with the Nature Conservancy. Due to the aggressive timeline we have and several unknowns, and I'll go through those in details, this contract's a little unique, and so I'm going to take my time and step through how we got to where we are with this contract. So for an overview, I'm going to give you the background of AMI and the GMA, some details on the NRCS grant, the selection process we went through to...
Arnie, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Are you? I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Well, I've got 1 or 2 mics on up here. I'll speak louder. I'll go through the selection process, very thorough selection process, and how we selected the vendor of the AMI, some of the challenges we have with this project to meet the deadlines, and then go into detail on how we plan to implement this contract and achieve the goals of the grant. And then really, I just want to talk about some of the worst case scenarios and, more importantly, the tools that we have in our toolbox to be sure we can avoid those worst case scenarios. And finally, the next steps as we move forward with this grant. So for background, the slide keeps getting longer and longer every time I come up. But the key points here are in October of 2017, your board approved the subaward agreement with NRCS, and that committed the funds to be matching for this contract. And then in February of 2018, your board approved the tiered incentive program. That's the incentives for well owners to install AMI. And then the last two there are from the operations committee. They recommended Ranch Systems to be the vendor under this contract. And then also in March, this month, they recommended this contracting strategy that I'm going to explain to purchase the AMI and get it installed. So for the NRCS grant, it's a water market grant, CIG, I should say the whole thing for everybody, the Natural Resource Conservation Service Conservation Innovation Grant. The innovation there is the water market. It's a water market grant. Phase 1 happened last year. Phase 2 is currently underway. Phase 2 in September 30th. So there is pressure to get AMI installed so we can have an effective test of Phase 2 under the water market. The AMI, automatic metering infrastructure, in the grant funds approximately 700 wells. We get close to $800,000 matching from NRCS or through Nature Conservancy, and we have the commitment of $541,000. Under the grant, the deadline for installation is March 31st, 2019, and that's Phase 3 of the water market full implementation. Very thorough, open, transparent selection process going through the operations committee. We released a request for qualifications. The details in there were discussed at the operations committee. Came up with a scoring matrix, which was approved by the operations committee. Let me step back. The request for qualifications was sent to 10 or 12 AMI firms. We got 6 responses. We screened those with our scoring matrix. The top 2 then were interviewed by a selection committee, and the members there were Brian Collins of United Water, James Dubois, and Matt Merrifield with the Nature Conservancy. Nature Conservancy was just an advisor on the technical database side. They unanimously recommended Ranch Systems, and the operations committee supported that recommendation. So let me get to the challenges we have with this project. There are a lot of unknowns that make this contract different than a lot of other contracts. While there is an ordinance for AMI, we don't know exactly how many well operators will apply for the incentive. Some may already have some systems that qualify for the ordinance. Some may, for operational business decisions, want to go with something else. We don't know the exact incentives that are going to be applied over this course. There's different incentive levels for joining the water market and not, and the later people apply for an incentive, the less they will get. And then finally, we don't know the cost of each installation because there's going to be unique circumstances on every wellhead. Some of the things we do know also create a bit of a challenge. Ranch Systems, because this is their busy season right now and their inventories are lower than normal, they have a three-month lead time on production for the scale we are looking at. We are looking at, in total, close to 700 units. Their standard order requires 50% down, and they were the vendor under Phase 1, and that was what they required then as well. And because we are dealing with such large numbers, they would like a commitment to purchase the units. So if we don't get those installed, they're not left holding a very, very large inventory. Whoops, I went the wrong direction. So Also, this doesn't go into the contract before you today, but also just for the project, control of the scheduling to meet the timeline is a little out of our control because we're depending on the applications coming in for the rebates. The well owners need to quickly select the equipment then Ranch Systems can bring that unit on site. And, well, before they get on site, they need to have an appointment made with the well owner, and they need to provide access. So our strategies to be successful here is we need to be able to forecast out 3 months in advance how many units we will need because of the lag time in building. But during that 3 months, we'll be receiving applications, and we'll be able to respond to those applications in the next forecasted purchase. As the grant continues, we can refine those orders as we get close to the end and we reach saturation where most of the well owners who want to use this incentive we can refine those orders down to the point where we're not dealing with the large numbers, and we can hopefully just finish up right on time and right with everybody getting what they need. On the accounting side, Ranch Systems will directly invoice the growers, or I should say the well owners, with the incentives subtracted out. And the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency would be paying those incentives directly to Ranch. So I'm going to start diving down a little more deeper in the details. An initial order is needed with 50% deposit so Ranch can begin production. We're going to adapt our future orders to match applications, and we really want to have a simple billing process for the owners so that they're not caught up in extra paperwork and they're not waiting on a rebate check from us. And our contract also needs to have specific performance targets to commit Ranch to meeting the deadlines and meeting the performance we need to meet the requirements in the grant. So what we have in the contract is it commits the GMA to fund an initial amount to begin production, and that's from the Operations Committee. We projected 300 units for the first 3 months would be a safe initial amount that we could not imagine not having 300 of well owners take us up on this offer over the whole period, especially when the ordinance kicks in. And I should take this moment to tell you that as of today, we already have 79 wells have applied for this incentive. For that first initial funding, we're going to, under the contract before you, it's 50%, since we don't know the actual equipment costs that's going to be ultimately installed, it's 50% of the rebates that are going to be applied, or the incentives that are going to be applied. When that happens, Ranch begins production. They'll go through and install them. As one is installed, Ranch will bill the owner for anything above the incentives, and the GMA will pay the other half of the incentive for that unit. So to put that in a little more simple form, GMA funds 50% of the incentives to Ranch for an order of units. They begin production. When they install one unit on one well, they will invoice the well owner minus that incentive. Well owner pays any cost above the incentives applied, and the GMA then pays the Ranch that other 50% that's owed. If the cost of installation is less than the incentive applied, then everything stays the same. Ranch installs a unit on the well. When they subtract the incentive out from the final invoice, there's nothing left for the well owner to pay, and the GMA only pays the remaining on that invoice. Right there, we only pay the remaining on that invoice. Also in the contract is the data hosting for the AMI. It's secure. Ranch Systems has a data hosting that's secure. Well owners will only be able to see their data on that web hosting. It's required that the data hosting supports the water market. That's the purpose of this grant. But We also have, I shouldn't say but also we have in there is data sharing with Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency, only limited to monthly extraction totals. And the alerts, if there are alerts of pump action that's not being recorded by the meter, or other things that could signal extractions of water that aren't being recorded or registered. For that data hosting, the grant will pay for the first year subscription, and the contract locks that into no increases to the well owner on that subscription more than 2.5%, I think, over the next 3 years. So for performance target on ranch, the initial order of 300, we need to have them produce those in 90 days. And that's what they've committed to. And for installations, hopefully they'll be able to do more than this, but the minimum, if there are 20 orders that have been approved by us and they have the paperwork of the growers, they need to be installing 10 a week or 50 a month at minimum. We really hope they to do more. They said they can do more than that, but this is the bottom line. And our options, if they don't meet those, are we can cancel our purchase guarantee. We can demand the return of monies that we've already advanced. We can require them to credit those monies to the second payment. We can impose a retention on payments that we would hold if they do not meet the contract over the full term. And ultimately, we can terminate the contract if they are not meeting our performance requirements. All right, so I want to talk about the tools that we have to avoid unlikely but the worst case scenarios. So if our initial order is 300 units and we do not receive 300 applications, we have an opportunity to increase the incentives so they are fully paid for so growers are more likely to step up. And then we do have the ordinance coming in effect at the end of this year. So carrot and stick. With the subsequent orders, if we do get more than 300 and we keep ordering more, we have, again, the applications coming in to inform how many we're going to be ordering in advance. And Ranch informed us that small orders, things that would fit normally within their inventory, a dozen, 2 dozen, won't require a deposit, won't require that commitment to purchase. So when we get down to the end, it's going to be, we won't have as long of the 3 months projection, and we will be a little better nimble at responding to applications. And if we fall behind grants or behind the grant schedule, as I mentioned, we have the performance standards for ranch. With the well owners, if they aren't making decisions, if they're not allowing access, if they're missing appointments, after December 31st, we do have the ordinance. Although, as I said, these are unlikely worst-case scenarios. I just want to point out the tools that we have. Okay. So our next steps, with approval from your board, ranch steps will begin production. We have workshops scheduled. We have flyers out there for the workshop right now. It's Tuesday, April 3rd at 3:30 at the Cal Lutheran Oxnard campus, and those flyers are out in the lobby. They will, in our scope of work, they have a web page, a landing page for Fox Canyon grant, or I should say incentive applicants. They will have a training video that we can host on our website so well owners know what the equipment's available, and they can begin to contact approved well owners. On our side, we continue the outreach and the workshops. Our outreach level was an email, and we've already got 79 applicants. I think with a stronger effort of mailers to well owners working with the landowners, we can really get those numbers up quickly. We have those applications in. We need to go through and approve them. And once it's approved, we need to enter incentive agreements with the well owners so they know what they're getting and what they're committing to. And our incentive agreements would be between Fox Canyon and the well owner. It identifies exactly how much they were approved for, the incentives, what equipment is eligible to be purchased, with these funds. There's upfront that they are authorizing that we see monthly extraction data and the alerts. There's a couple triggers here. We need to make sure that they select the equipment within 30 days so we can move, so Ranch can keep up with their schedule. And if they decide to join the water market, we want them to complete that paperwork and join the water market within 30 days because they're eligible for a higher grant if they join the water market, and we want to make sure that happens. So the recommendation is to approve the proposed AMI incentives and implementation contract with Ranch. And just to be clear, this approval authorizes an initial payment of 50% of the first 300 incentives under the tiered incentive program with a commitment to purchase those. And with that, Ranch can begin production on the first 300 of the close to 700 we plan to install. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments? It seems to me like there's a lot of moving parts.
There are.
And a lot of ways for this to get derailed. Are there systems and people in place to minimize that risk?
We've thought out.
Looking at it.
I got some extra slides
Ian is
here.
There's a guillotine right
Yeah.
above your head, Arnie.
We've thought out all the decision points and all the moving parts and have it mapped out. We do have new staff coming on for a water quality compliance specialist. One of the first steps is to ensure that everybody who's applied is in compliance with all agency ordinances, and I think it'll be a good learning exercise for that person just to go through all the applications and see if they're in compliance and not. So we have that extra staff person that we can.
I'm less concerned about the applications you have than those that you don't. The people in the room and who've been in the room are familiar, I'm sure, with the concept and the process, but there's a lot more affected people who aren't here. I know there's been some discussion about outreach, and I know there are some meetings scheduled, but what's actually happening to draw those people in, to grab them by the back of the neck and get them in the room where they can get the information they need? Because I don't think it's enough just to make it available and expect compliance.
I did not bring that notes. So we have done more outreach than just the mailer. We are working with the Farm Bureau. Alma Quezada has contacted several property managers to make sure that lands that are held in trust, that we can get to them to make sure they are aware of this opportunity. She's also working with the Ag Commission to help get the word out about not just this, not just the ordinance and this opportunity, and also the workshops that are coming up and the water market.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board?
So one thing I want to make sure I heard properly was that the monthly service agreement or the monthly service charge in order for the equipment to connect to the web is included in the grant, or is this the hosting by Ranch Systems for the information to come to the GMA is included in the grant?
The first year includes the hosting for the equipment to communicate to Ranch's database.
Okay. And then from there, if I see this pricing that's included, it's $20 a month.
Correct.
$240 a year.
Correct.
If there are no other questions from the board, are there any questions from the public? Comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the AMI incentive implementation contract?
So moved.
And a second? Second. Need a roll call, please?
Chair West?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director Aranio?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Arnie, all I can say is be careful what you wish for.
If I could make one request, that we sign that agreement before the end of the
By all
day,
means.
and we can get. We can't lose a minute, is what I'm saying.
No worries.
I do want to say that Robert and I sit on the operations committee, and you're right. This is, there's a lot of challenges with this, but I really think that, I can't speak for Robert, but I think most people would say staff has really worked hard to try to work the details out on this. I mean, this is not a, 5 minute, let's figure it out. They've really been busting their hump to try to work with ranch and work with the stakeholders to try to figure out how to do this. And we all know this is really important. If we want to value water as much as we need to value it, we've got to have an accurate way for everybody to trust that we're getting accurate reporting, and this is essential. So he's got a really important job, and he and Kim they're busting their humps on this thing, but it doesn't mean it's going to be without any potholes in it.
All right, moving on then to agenda item number 5, an update on the pumping allocation system for the Las Posas Valley Basin.
Good afternoon, Chair West and members of the board, Kim Loeb, GMA staff. So, as a little background, and I think that you're pretty well familiar with this since we've been talking about it pretty much monthly, but Las Posas Users Group, or LPUG, developed a new framework for pumping allocation system in the Las Posas Valley under a charter agreement with this agency. The proposed new allocation system was described in a white paper dated November 7th of 2016. It was presented to your board at the January 2017 meeting, and your board approved a plan to evaluate and work towards finalizing and implementing the Las Posas Valley Basin allocation system. There was a revised white paper developed in June of 2017, which was presented to a special board meeting on June 23rd of 2017. At that meeting, the LPUG reported they were at an impasse with a new stakeholder group calling themselves Las Posas Basin Water Rights Coalition. And LPUG requested the agency staff complete development of the allocation system, and your board directed staff to work with both the LPUG and the coalition to see if some resolution compromise could be achieved. Staff has met with both groups. We had a joint meeting on March 1st, earlier this month. And the Water Rights Coalition have articulated their views. In their view, the LPUG was that this is fundamentally a water rights issue or landholder issue, is their view, and their view was that LPUG was controlled by appropriators, and that the proposed allocation system was fundamentally flawed and it should be discarded and a new system developed based on water rights of the overlying landowners. They also felt that the allocation should be tied to the land and not to wells, although they did allow that there were some minor parts of the proposed system that they would be amenable to discussing with accepting with modifications. And LPUG view was that they've developed a proposed system through a long public process under an agency charter, and they were willing to discuss specific changes to the proposed system with the Water Rights Coalition folks, but that the LPUG group was unlikely to be interested in scrapping the work that they've done and starting over on the effort. And so we came away from that meeting that it was pretty clear that the two groups have fundamental intractable differences in philosophy and approach to development of the allocation system. It seemed unlikely that compromise acceptable to both groups will be reached. We learned this morning that members of the Water Rights Coalition group filed suit against the agency yesterday. We haven't seen it yet, but so that's a new development. And just in conclusion, your board has consistently indicated that your intent is to have a new allocation system in place by October 1st of this year, ideally by July 1st when we start to transition off the current Ordinance E, current reporting period, end of June for M&I and domestic, and end of July for ag reporters. In order to be implemented and effective by October 1st, we would have to complete development of a new allocation system and have an ordinance ready to be adopted no later than the August 10th special meeting. So that concludes my remarks on this update on this allocation system development. So request your any feedback you might have at this time.
Without wanting to confuse things, and while at the same time reinforcing the notion that, yes, we do want to move forward expeditiously with a new allocation plan that will fit handily with the GSP. The timeline, there are some issues that have arisen before yesterday that I've discussed with Jeff that may require some extra work, that may push that timeline out, may make implementation by October 1st with an entirely new plan problematic. And so we may have to do something in the short term with the existing structure while we continue to work on a new allocation plan. But that's probably a little premature, and I don't say that to upset anybody who has to do any reporting, just to alert everyone that the timeline may have to change because of some contingencies and some issues that we don't have any control over. That having been said, that's my only comment.
I'll make one comment. A lot of things that have to get worked out here, but we have been operating under irrigation efficiency, and we all recognize it's not working at all. And what I'm not willing to do is stay. I mean, when we go to, what we're trying to do is start the new reporting year, and that's why they want to have this done. If we don't have a plan that we're ready to adopt, we have to adopt something that is a temporary plan that is not IAI. It's got to be some other system, and it's people kept saying, well, why should we switch when we're going to switch to something else? Well, who knows how long it's going to be, but we cannot. We've kicked the can down the road on emergency ordinance E for years, saying we were going to move really fast. That's why we didn't have to fix emergency ordinance E. We can't go past this summer. So the one thing I will be, and if there's comments about that, but I would certainly be pushing our staff to say, we're going to come up with an allocation plan that will be somewhere in the ballpark of these allocation plans. And we'll say it's temporary. It's just to get us so that we're off of IAI, and it starts to get us conserving. And so outside of that, I'm happy to hear what the public has to say about the controversies, because I know we got them in both places. We got them in both basins. So I'm happy to listen to that as we try to figure out what the right way is to go with that also. Thank you.
Question I have for you, Kim. Has the Water Rights Coalition presented a white paper as to how they would do things differently from what the LPUG has submitted? Have they stepped their plan out in the detail?
Director Ronnie, we do not have a detailed framework for an allocation system. What they've presented is philosophical differences from the approach that was taken, and areas in where they feel that the approach was not consistent with law. But in terms of a worked out white paper with an alternative proposal for an allocation system, no, we haven't received such a thing. Okay.
So in order for me to wrap my head around this and understand these differences better, would it be possible, or in order to request a matrix to be made comparing the two, And those areas where you do not have clarity with one plan or the other, you leave that box clear, whether it be both plans, if there's an area that you feel that was unaddressed or needs to be addressed in greater detail, so I can get a handle here as to what we're looking at.
We can do that. The Water Rights Coalition representatives started out by saying they didn't believe that the pools that were identified and so just the fundamental start of the LPUG developed allocation system they did not agree with. But we have something similar there. We sat down with the groups and went through that. And we can provide that. I'm not sure it'll be as informative as you hope it might be based on that.
If there's missing data, there's missing data. Let the empty block speak for itself as to whoever's plan is missing the data. But it would help me better understand again and compare and contrast what are the issues here that are being addressed and those that are not being addressed, and how they may be addressed differently if there's a valid argument to it.
And could I?
Joe, please.
Points where there's agreement, put those in too.
But it would really be helpful if maybe by the next board meeting we have that in this type of a report to get a better understanding, especially in light of the new development that has presented itself to us. As far as Director Bennett's comments, I would really hope that we could stay with that October 1 deadline. I understand there might be some challenges as to what you've alluded to, but I have the feeling here that given the information that's been presented to this board, the water year and the findings that have gone on there, that if we don't do something by this fall, what are we doing here? Why do we exist? This is a year that we need to make a statement and do something.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the public?
Good afternoon, Chair Weston Board. I do want to make a few comments, and I'll do my very best to stay in the time limit that you've described. When I was last here, it was one of many efforts to engage with your staff and your board and the LPUG folks on behalf of the coalition. And I said there were very specific issues. They are clear and unambiguous as to what those agreements are, and I understand the political statements of Director Aranio, who effectively wrote the white paper for LPUG and is involved in trying to sustain it and still doesn't see any conflicts with all of that behavior. And I said very honestly to your board, if we don't see some direction, I'm confident that the litigation would start. So we went to a meeting that took 6 weeks to schedule. My letter is part of your packet, and with due respect to staff, it is just not an accurate description that you've heard. We attended, or the coalition attended, not just myself, but with 3 representatives that I named in the letter. And we were prepared to go through the LPUG allocation plan in draft form, item by item, and identify exactly where the coalition felt it made sense, even if we got there from a different perspective philosophically, because whether you go from an allocation point of view or a water rights point of view, there are points where implementation and structures make sense. So we were prepared to identify with particularity the areas of agreement and identify with particularity the areas where we thought there could be compromise or should be compromise, and areas where we thought there really were fundamental disagreements. And it was our intent to come out of that with your staff being able to say to you unambiguously, here's where there are the disagreements, here's where the agreements, here's where the compromises are, and as to the areas of the disagreements, here's why there are the disagreements, and then you folks, as the deciding body then would have framed for you why there are the disagreements, what the key areas of disagreements were, hear appropriate testimony, hear whatever arguments you want to make, and then make decisions. That was our agenda. We spent a fair amount of time before that meeting preparing to have that detailed conversation. LPUG showed up with Jane. I like Jane. She's a nice lady. I have no issues with Jane. And she said she had no portfolio, no ability to discuss anything in particular, no authorization from the board to have any particular conversation. There was no consultant, Mr. Bondi or anybody else on behalf of LPUG. There was no board member or group of people on behalf of LPUG or stakeholders that are involved in LPUG to have those conversations. So she said, well, I'll listen and then I'll go back to LPUG and ask them at the end of March at the next meeting whether or not I'm authorized to move forward and have conversation, and if so, in what fashion. Now, at that point in time, your board had made very clear that you wanted an allocation plan from your staff in draft in April or the latest, the earliest, the first part of May, to meet that timeline, which was a discussion, a revision, and enactment by July 1. So when LPUG showed up at that meeting in March and said, well, we're not even prepared to have a conversation until we go back to the board and see if the board is willing to have that conversation, which means the conversations don't happen until April, which means you don't hear from your staff until probably May. That train left the station, and in our view, to be perfectly blunt, it was an intentional, purposeful disrailment of the process that you asked us to engage in. So I want to be very clear that the coalition acted in good faith. I viewed the request by Chair West to me, who I've known a long time, to try and have this dialogue and conversation to be an honest broker request, and the coalition attended that. Nobody from the coalition was there with any authority, and that includes you, Mr. Aranio. Nobody showed up with any willingness to have a particular conversation. Now, against that backdrop, and July 1, the coalition had no alternative. And so it is true, and I served Keeley before your board meeting. The basin adjudication litigation has been filed. The FCGMA has been served. It is going to move forward. How and in what manner it moves forward with all the other basins and all the other issues will be a matter to be determined. I will tell your board, and then I'll be quiet, that at least in my view, there are fundamental conflicts of interest on this board that have not been attended to, that I've brought to the attention of your staff, and I've never heard discussed. There is a $1.5 million slush fund for litigation that we think is an illegal slush fund, and we would, on the record, caution this board before you spend a dime of that slush fund relative to this litigation. We think there are conflicts with respect to county counsel's office, and this notion that is being touted by Director Aranio and respectfully Director Bennett that in the face of this basin litigation, we're going to have some sort of plan implemented and we're going to effectively strip water rights in the pendency of the litigation. I would urge that not to be the case. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question for you. Right.
Yes, sir.
So you were prepared to sit down and do that with the LPUG representatives, go through and point out where you agreed and disagreed?
Are you asking me, are we ready to?
No, I said you were prepared at that
Correct.
point in time. So my question is,
Yes.
Are you willing to sit down with our staff, take the LPUG plan and say where you agree with it and where you disagree with it?
I don't know the answer to that, given the comments from you and Director Aranio this afternoon, which is you're going to do something, anything tomorrow. And we have litigation pending, and I don't know that that's possible outside of the context of consulting with lead water rights litigation counsel. We went really honestly. We went to that meeting with decision makers to solve problems, and it didn't happen.
So far, we don't have any plan or even a specified critique of the other plan that would let us know what the details of what your proposal is.
No, I don't think that's accurate. I would refer you to the multiple letters I've written to your board and your staff, as well as a number of other documents. We have met with Mr. Pratt now on a couple of occasions with staff. We've gone through all of these issues in a very detailed detailed manner.
I'm asking these questions in the spirit of just trying to find out what it is you want, in the spirit of trying to, as staff said, figure out when we have to make our decisions, we at least know what the arguments are on both sides. And in spite of those, that additional information would be helpful to be able to more accurately clarify the distinction. So I say that further for your benefit, and that's the reason I'm asking the question.
Okay, and I take it in that spirit, and I'll get back to you guys on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Members of the board, Chairman West, I'm Dan Rosenthal, part of the coalition. I want to make sure that you understand some fundamental issues that we've had over this long period of time, over a year and a half, maybe 2 years. But first I want to say that the coalition does want a sustainable, well-managed basin in the Las Posas Valley. So in principle, we agree with that concept. And now I'm going to read my comments to you. After a year and a half of expressing our views and concerns over the process of the Fox Canyon development of an allocation plan for the Las Posas groundwater basin, including meetings and discussions with board members, county staff, LPUG members, Cayugas Water District, and many others, the Las Posas Basin Water Rights Coalition has determined that the only way the water rights of the basin will be properly, fairly, and finally respected and resolved is by a comprehensive adjudication in a court of law. We have explained over and over that water rights are just that, a property right, not a commodity to be allocated at the whim of politicians and bureaucrats to suit whatever priority they choose, but an important part of the property rights that all of us enjoy under the Constitution and laws of this country and state. In our exploration of the GMA's process, we have discovered that the basic science used to examine the basin is not only inadequate and incomplete, but also full of errors and assumptions, not facts. We have asked the GMA and its technical committee to take the time and spend the appropriate money to do a complete and thorough study so that everyone in the basin can have confidence that we're using good information to make our decisions on how to manage the basin for the long term. But the answer has always been no. There is no pressing deadline in front of the GMA to complete this allocation plan. We have years in front of us to complete this process carefully. Why is the GMA rushing to push their plan now? We can only wonder why the GMA is going so fast. Why has almost no serious consideration been given to the replenishment of the basin and all the emphasis on restricting the use of water? Why has this process excluded the main stakeholders in this discussion, i.e. the landowners who own the overlying water rights being considered here, when they have fundamental legal rights at stake in this process? Why isn't the sustainability of the farming community, an extraordinary asset to this community and its economy, being considered in this process when so much of the county's economic health depends on it? The laws concerning water rights in California are clear. Why is the GMA ignoring them? We want our water rights respected. We want the cost of preserving and replenishing the basin to be fairly allocated amongst its users, and the projects and costs to be open and transparent. We want the science used to determine any allocation plan to be thoroughly vetted and carefully completed. This will take time and effort, but it's worth it. We want any allocation plan to be based on the law and on good science, not politics. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good afternoon. Lynn Jensen with Ventura County CoLab. I just want to say that this point that we're at is really not surprising when in watching the rising frustration level with the process and the basic refusal to discuss how these allocation plans would affect water rights through the redistribution of groundwater. And just talking about the frustrations with the process, let's start with pushing the consultant to put out an unfinished GSP for review with internal inconsistencies, unfinished chapters. You can read that in the letter that was put out that I saw today by Callegas, Camarosa, Pleasant Valley, and United Water in their comment letter. The artificial timeline that was impossible to meet, causing time and dollars to be spent on this premature product. The lack of appreciation of the complexity of the modeling effort going on in the background, and the importance of the calculation of safe yields to be allocated by this GSP. The lack of respect for the TAG members, their time and energy and level of commitment to good science. They really want this to be a great product, and so do we. The lack of respect for stakeholders forced to deal with this poor quality draft. We're not sure exactly what to look at, how to determine what's going to be changed and what is reliable in this document. And again, look at the comment letters that we received today. In the end, the Fox Canyon GMA needs to adopt a plan that's legally defensible. Otherwise, it is going to go through litigation, and now we know that for Los Pozos, it's going to be. Farmers in this county have no other options but to farm. Converting farmland to development is nearly impossible, requiring a SOAR vote, LAFCO decisions, environmental mitigation, and the catch-22 of trying to find supporting infrastructure. And really, even with farm worker housing in this county, it's really been stymied for years in trying to overcome those hurdles. Ag is a $2 billion industry. It supplies the community with the free view shed, abundant fruits and vegetables for our restaurants and our tables. And for our members, what we want is a plan that's fair to agriculture, that respects agricultural water rights, and makes sure they are preserved. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone further?
Good afternoon. I'm Esper Peterson and a farmer out in Somas. 18 years ago, I drove down LA Avenue, right by Somas Road, and I saw a sign that said, "Watch out for tractors." And I said, I want to live here. I didn't know the farm was there, ranch was there that I was going to buy, but I like it there, and I fixed it up pretty nice, and I'm going to give it to my two boys when I'm not here anymore, and they can be farmers. 1971, actually I think it was 1969, I forget. Brian would know a little better. There was a lawsuit up in Santa Barbara called the Glida Valley Water District versus Martha Wright et al. I was in that for 17 years. Glida Valley Water District tried to take our water away. 17 years later, we won. We got our water rights, and that proved to be very beneficial to us. I don't care what this costs, how long it takes, but I want the water rights preserved per the law that have been explained that it is. So I'll be here, and we'll see how long this takes. I just hope that you guys all decide to do the right thing on this. So thank you very much.
Anyone further? This is a receive and file. There's no action required.
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Moving on then to item number 6, an update on the allocation plan for OPV.
Afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. For the record again, Kim Loeb, GMA staff. So a brief background or history of where we are on the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley allocation system development. At the January 2017 board meeting, a year ago, after there'd been a lot of work to try and get to a new allocation system, your board expressed frustration and said that they wanted the OPV stakeholders to develop and submit a proposed plan within the next 90 days to be implemented as of October 1st last year. And that was the first that was articulated by your board, that the agency should develop a backup or an interim plan in case such a stakeholder developed plan was not developed within that time frame. At the June meeting last year, your board was informed that the OPV stakeholders were not going to be ready to submit a plan within the time frame that your board had promulgated before, and directed staff to return by the end of the year with an interim allocation system. And then your board held 2 evening executive committee public workshops to solicit input and feedback and ideas on development of an allocation system for the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley basins. At the November 13th meeting last year, staff did present a framework for an interim pumping allocation system, and based on stakeholder feedback, we came back to your board at January 3rd, 2018, with a revision to the proposed base period of 2003 to 2016. Stakeholders made comments about their need for flexibility or their belief that they needed that, and your board directed staff to investigate bringing some kind of flexibility into the allocation system. Staff held an evening public meeting on the 18th of January to present the framework that had been presented to your board and received public comments, and then your board's executive committee focused on the issue of flexibility and requested stakeholder input and suggestions for how flexibility might be brought into the plan. So members of the OPV Ag Group, which is the Oxnard PV Ag Owners, Inc., the representatives of that group, along with representatives of the municipal industrial pumpers in the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley basins, have been participating in regular meetings with staff and helped provide input and development of what had been presented to your board. We received correspondence from 2 of the members in late February, just before the February meeting. We discussed those at your February meeting, and they talked about a draft allocation replenishment plan white paper dated February 7th, which we received a copy of on March 8th. Now, it should be pointed out that that white paper and the concerns that were pointed out in those letters are specifically addressing suballocation of the agricultural pumpers, or how much the allocations of the 60% of groundwater extraction. There had been come to an agreement of 40% for M&I pool and then 60% ag, and this was these conversations were really how to address the suballocation of the agricultural pumping. Staff met with the OPV Ag Group representatives on March 14th to discuss the white paper, and again on March 22nd we took a deeper dive into it. The plan presented there is essentially the same plan that we had developed with the both the ag and the M&I representatives over the year, except for 2 important differences, and that was the base period for the ag allocation and then the method of reduction. There's a minority within that ag group that we were represented that within their ag owners group, which is a closed group, we're not at those meetings, but that they took a poll of the general members there, and that the majority supported the white paper approach, but there's a vocal minority that says that this is, that proposed approach is not legal and there are problems, and they've been vocal about those concerns. So what are the main differences? So the main differences are that, so just to get you, this is what was proposed to date by the staff, and this is what's in the OPV white paper. So the base period or starting allocation, we proposed a base period of the annual average pumping over 2003 to 2016. And the white paper is proposing the single highest year's pumping of the last 3 reporting periods. And then for the allocation reduction method over 20 years to achieve the sustainable yield of the basins, we hadn't really gotten into detail with that in what had been presented to you, to your board so far, but I think we're in the working idea it would just be a proportional reduction across all the pumpers. The white paper has what they're calling a hybrid reduction methodology where higher users would be reduced at a faster rate than the lowest users. And in fact, at the end of the time, there would be some equalization, and some of the lowest users would actually have a larger allocation at the end of 20 years than at the start. So again, your board has had the same intention here in the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley basins to have a new allocation system move off of the ordinance EIAI no later than August 1st. And again, an allocation system would have to be completed and developed into ordinance language for the August 10th meeting at the latest. Staff plans to come back to your board at the August 28th meeting with some more details on the 2 proposals and maybe a matrix where appropriate, as Director Aranio has talked about for the other basin. After we get more board direction in terms of how we should work towards completing that allocation system, then we would hold at least in one more additional public workshop in order to get all the stakeholders within the 2 basins input from them and allow comments. And that's the end of my report.
You said you'd bring more details at the August 28th meeting. You meant the April 28th meeting, didn't you?
I did say August. I meant April. Thank you for
you.
that correction, Director Craven.
Having spent more than a little time with the white paper, it seems to me that I respect the amount of work that went into it. 2 observations. One, I think there are some fundamental legal problems with some of the approaches taken in part of the white paper. And in addition, I think the white paper overlooked some critical issues that aren't addressed, that need more work, need some attention, that make the approach in the white paper even more vulnerable. I'm not yet convinced personally there isn't a way to bridge the gap between the 2 groups out there. I may just be an optimist, but I'd like to think that if we're creative enough, we can make the process work for everybody. And hopefully, as staff explores with that group the elements of those of the plan and the missing parts, we can get closer to some consensus. But I think it needs a lot of work. Questions, comments?
I'd like to make some comments myself. Over the past month, I was invited and participated, I think, in about 5 hours of meetings over a couple days with the primary individuals of the OPV white paper, and had some members of United Water join me in that also. Some things that I saw from it as to the closeness between the interim plan and what is proposed, there are major holes as they're not being addressed that I have concerns about. One of them has to be specifically about the lack of surface water in the relatively near future. The OPV plan white paper is looking at, and round numbers just for this, that surface water would be on top of groundwater production. And that surface water would be used in order to balance out the ebbs and flows of cyclical changes. I think that's wildly optimistic that surface water will be back at the historical levels that it has been, or even that it will be readily available within the next 5 years, given the priorities that United has for surface water and the existing overdraft hole within the forebay. So there's a big problem with that how surface water is going to be counted and whether or not it's even going to be available, I think jeopardizes the entire plans and their legitimacy. Second of all, there's an issue with regards to land use and lands that are currently not in production and are coming into production. The example that I will give here actually came from Tony Morgan when he presented it this way. If United continues to get beat up the way we are, and environmental restrictions that are in place continue, we don't generally have a reason to hold on to the Faro pit. That was historically ag, and we may very well sell that property off. But at this time, it will not have an allocation with it because of how many years we've been holding it with intention for spreading. So that would be new land coming into production. How do you handle that? I see that as a whole. There's also a claim about possibility of cities decreasing our groundwater and going more imported water. Well, there's a problem there also because that is an in lieu delivery and is illegal as far as Metropolitan and Cayugas are. So I have difficulty with that one also. With what has been presented, what I do like and where I am with this, as I stated last time. The 3-year period, 14 through 17, I do like, not single highest year. I would be more in place with an averaging of the 3 years because you have 2 dry and 1 wet. I know it's not 10 years, I know it's not perfect, but it does, there was no surface water deliveries during that time, and we do have some cyclical pattern in it. So rather than a single highest year, I like the 3-year average. I don't know if I share Director West's optimism that by the end of May that we're going to be able to bridge the gap on these two. And given the amount of work that's there and the inherent problems that if surface water is not going to be available, the challenges that that presents. And with that in mind, I'm not sure that I'm going to be in any kind of a position to be able to vote in favor of either the interim plan or the OPV plan. But again, I don't think we should not do anything. So I'm going to float an idea that here's a third one where no one's going to be happy. I'm not going to be happy about it. OPV's not going to be happy about it, and the interim folks are not going to be happy about it. But it moves the ball forward and it allows us to do something. And that would be consideration of maybe a 30% IAI cut. And the reason why I picked that number, based upon the IAIs that have come in, a lot of them are around 70%. It doesn't immediately throw you into surcharges, but it buys us some time to continue working on this, and it puts you on notice that we're ratcheting down and we got to do something. So I don't know what my other board members are, but there's still some holes that need to be plugged on this, both of these, for me.
Director, you mentioned substitution of state water from Cayugas for groundwater being illegal, and you called it an in lieu delivery. What do you mean by that?
Susan, can you come up and explain that one in better detail? I'll let the expert talk on that.
Thanks.
So, Susan Mulligan, General Manager of Cayugas Municipal Water District. So, in order to be allowed and qualified to buy imported water, land has to be annexed to Cayugas and Metropolitan. And land in this county, almost all of it, annexed in about 1960, early 1960s. And they have paid since that time property taxes to pay for the imported water supply facilities that bring the water here. So someone who has not owned property that's annexed to Cayugas cannot benefit or receive imported water. Now that's very clear when it's water going directly off property. Example, Tom Selleck a few years ago was getting water from a hydrant in Thousand Oaks and delivering it to Hidden Valley, which is not annexed. The groundwater argument's a little bit more subtle, but it's real. If Oxnard, for example, were to sell its groundwater to someone who is not annexed, they would have to buy more imported water as a result. So effectively, that imported water is benefiting somebody outside the annexed area. That particular way of moving water around was figured out decades and decades ago by Cayugas and Metropolitan, and it is in Cayugas's ordinance for supply of water and Metropolitan's administrative code that water within an annexed area cannot be moved outside that annexed area, even if it's groundwater, because it really would be imported water moving out, because that entity would then have to buy more imported water. It's complicated, but that's the rule, and that's the reason for the rule. Any questions?
Yeah.
You're lost? There's a limited amount of imported water, and it is there for the benefit of those in the annexed area. People who haven't annexed can't benefit from that investment in imported supply that's been made all that time by the ones that are annexed. So the water can't move out.
Couldn't one make the argument that if a city chose to take imported water, say a greater amount than they were already taking, because they had made some other arrangement, what does Cayugas and Met care about that?
Because we are responsible for the water supplies of our region, and when those entities annexed, they agreed that they would not move resources outside the annexed area.
Well, in fact, they're not. They've just chosen not to pump groundwater. They've decided to buy more imported water.
That's fine
if they
if they
the taxes on that, or the subsidies, right?
That's fine if they don't move the water to someone outside the annexed area. They can choose not to pump it. It would stay in the ground. They might lose it. They might, but typically people don't, because groundwater is less expensive than imported water. They can choose not to pump it, but they cannot choose to sell it outside the boundaries or even deliver it for free outside the boundaries. I can provide you copies of the two ordinances. They explain it more eloquently than I do. But those are rules, and they are rules that Metropolitan and Cayugas will enforce strongly, because particularly in times of shortage, our customers are damaged if our limited water supply moves out of our annexed area.
I'd like to see that document.
I'd be happy to share it with you, and I can send it over. Now, in Las Posas, that's not an issue, because everyone is annexed. It's the Oxnard Plain that part of it isn't annexed, and that's the concern. West Las Posas also is not annexed.
Director West, as I'm trying to get my head around this, I just want to share some thoughts in case anybody now or in the future wants to try to enlighten me about it. There are just two thoughts that I have. Again, we're all, the five of us are going to have to make some hard decisions about what to do with these things. And one is, I think about our staff plan, and staff was talking with me about it, you know, if we have proportional cuts, I'm going to raise the argument that was raised when we tried to do proportional cuts when we were trying to come up with emergency ordinance E. And that was the people that have been good water savers already feel like they're being penalized because they're still having to cut. Now it's proportional, but they're already down low. So if you're at 1.6 and you know you take all the water out there and now you got to cut down to 1.2, but you may not have to be cutting as much in terms of acre feet, but proportionally you may be getting down to the point where you just can't do anything productive with that land. So I'm scratching my head about proportional cuts and whether for the people at the low end that's a fair or an appropriate process. And the other one, which is way riskier than I probably shouldn't be saying this, but because it's a complicated issue and stuff, maybe somebody will enlighten me as we go through this whole issue of the interplay between the old-fashioned, I shouldn't say old-fashioned, but the way we've done water rights, the legal water rights issue in California, being squared with the groundwater sustainability plans being written. The illusion, for example, of Mr. Goldenring that if we change emergency ordinance E from IAI to something else, that we've somehow now established everybody's water rights permanently. My initial thought is I'm having trouble thinking that is how a court would rule that when the state of California is asking everybody to adopt these plans. At some point in time, if all that the groundwater sustainability agencies can do is do like an adjudication, I'm not sure they would have set it up this way. But so I don't know. I mean, the last thing I could possibly think that I'm any good at is predicting where things are going to go legally, but I appreciate that we have some established law, and I appreciate that we have some new situations out there, and I don't know where that all goes, but I certainly would be stunned if somebody said, no, you can't change from IAI to anything else because you're taking away our water rights. Particularly if we said we're just doing that until we adopt our plan, which we just don't know when the plan's going to get adopted. That strikes me as a strange position. Thank you for giving me that opportunity to say that. And if anybody wants to enlighten me, I'm happy to do it. It doesn't have to be here. It can be anywhere, anytime that you want to do that as we go forward. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board? From the public?
Good afternoon, Jared Bouchard, General Manager of the Pleasant Valley County Water District.
Could you talk right into the mic, please?
I'm sorry. Is that better?
Yes.
So I had I would encourage Director West with staff's tight timeline, if you could give us some feedback. We are a participant in OPV as to what those issues are, some direct feedback, whether contact the President or Acting President Greg Lewis. We have an opportunity to maybe address those and help that and help staff move that ahead. With respect to a couple of Director Ranio's comments, I'm not sure where the whole confusion came up that somehow there's some proposal within the white paper that there's going to be a transfer of state water or groundwater or anything of that sort. It was just one of those items we all recognize, and there's agreement that going forward there's going to be a replenishment fee, and that was one of those things that just, hey, maybe that's a way to do it. If it's not a way to do it and use the replenishment fees to offset it, then it's not. So it's not included in the white paper, not any part of the OPV proposal. I think it just maybe came out in discussion, but it's not specific in there. The surface water question.
Could I just interrupt you
Yeah.
for 1 second? And that is, while it may not be in there, I know at least from my perspective, it seems like it's an issue we'll have to be dealing with. How do we factor surface water in when we're doing allocations? I don't know how, but I just want to get that said. Down the road, I'll want to know what do we do with it? Do we factor it in? Do we not factor it in? Is it part of your initial allocation? All of that. So I just wanted to get that said while you're on that point.
I appreciate that.
Well,
and
if
in
I could
fact,
jump
what
in too, I just also add that kind of the whole concept of conjunctive use is utilizing any water that people can get a hold of when and if state water is available. It seems like this agency is in a prime position to facilitate its use. And so how that arrangement gets done, what Mr. Bouchard has suggested with utilizing replenishment fees, really valid ways to think about that.
I think we're all going to have to work together, and it's just one of the creative solutions that's come up through conversations that was there. And then we have some hurdles of how you may or may not be able to do that, whether we ever can. So anyhow, just want to clarify that it's not in the white paper. Director Ronnie also commented about the surface water component. I think what is inherent within the white paper and understanding is that there's a risk associated with it. And yes, while the 60-40 split was based on pumping only that staff refers to, the surface water component within the sub-allocation and floating on top is a risk that the majority came to conclusion that it would sit on top. And so if it doesn't show up, everybody's got to ratchet back. If it does show up, there's some benefit. So I don't mean this at all to be pompous in any way, but I'm not sure it's your concern to deal with if that's what the group decides that they want to share in that risk and share in the reward. I just say that very respectfully. In answer to Director Bennett, I don't even want to try and tell you where the legal arguments will go, sir, but appreciate that. I think we're all wondering. And then I have one other question. I attend a lot of these meetings, and I'm curious, we're very focused on the ag sub-allocation pool, and certain components of the white paper have some assumptions in there, i.e. the basis of the 60-40 split. Is there an M&I allocation proposal that's going to be coming forward? Has that been decided? Because that could have impacts on where all of these discussions move.
You mean a sub-allocation proposal within
yes,
M&I?
Thank you.
I know that they're having discussions. If there's a plan, we haven't seen one. I don't know if it's any different than the T, but frankly, I don't see why what M&I does with its allocation and how it subdivides it should make any difference. Unless, of course, they've got it for sale, but should make any difference to what ag does.
I think you're correct as long as all the assumptions work together that the foundational principles were based on. So I'll leave it at that, and hopefully we'll get there.
Thank you, Jack. Susan?
So there is a way that the Oxnard Plain can use state project water. They're annexed to United, and United is part of the West County. They hold state project rights as part of this West County coalition, and they have the right to buy state project water, buy excess state project water, buy it from Ventura and Casitas, and they can deliver it to the Oxnard Plain. That area is annexed to United. So although the parts that aren't annexed to Callegas can't buy from us, they can buy through United and have access to state project water. So I think that's a real solution that could work for them.
But it's expensive.
Yes. I mean, it's expensive.
It is a solution, but it's expensive.
But it's
the people behind you can't see the look on your face right now.
Well, I think what I was thinking or just tossing around in my mind was the concept that if groundwater were left in the ground and somehow those folks who decided to leave it in the ground were compensated in some fashion, perhaps with replenishment fees, that maybe is a way to get there and utilize whatever import water might be available. Is that concept acceptable to Callegas?
As long as nobody pumps it out. I mean, that's the challenge.
Well, we've had these discussions.
We've gone there. I think United might be a better
You and I are
solution.
going to have a conversation.
We can have.
There is a way. There is a way. Just don't watch my hands. That's all.
Chair and directors, I'm Jurgen Gramko. I want to take a stab at your question, Supervisor Bennett. This is the layman's quick primer on water rights, as I understand it. And you've gotten some memos from my attorney, and I've bored into this quite a bit. You have different priority users to begin with. You have overliers, who are the landowners overlying the aquifer. And then you have appropriators, who are municipalities. And overliers have a priority right over municipalities, over the appropriators. If there's sufficient water, well, let me back up one more step. So there's a term in the law called beneficial use. You can't use water, you can't waste it if you're an overlier, you can't sell it if you're an overlier, but you can put it to beneficial use, and it is not quantified. There's another doctrine that's called correlative rights. That doctrine says that every overlier has a right to use the water that's under his land, an equal right, an unrestricted right to beneficial use. Beneficial use is not quantified. So essentially everybody has the right to stick their straw in the glass, and everybody has the right, the beneficial use right, to drink what they need, unquantified. Some will drink more than others. So if there's enough water in the glass, then the appropriators may use what's left over, the surplus. So that's sort of the fundamental starting point. When you get into a situation of overdraft and there isn't enough for the appropriators, the overliers would normally tell the appropriators, well, you have to stop because we have a priority right. It's not clear whether the overliers ever said that, but we've been in overdraft for decades. And the appropriators have been pumping for decades, and the overliers have been pumping for decades. So what happens under those circumstances is that the appropriators develop what's called a prescriptive right. In other words, if you've been taking water without permission for more than 5 years, you develop a right to continue to do that. So without admitting here on the podium that that's occurred, we'll make the presumption for this discussion that it has. So now what happens is that that prescriptive right becomes a superior right to the overlier. So now the overlier's right just got leapfrogged by the prescriptive right, except for the amount that the overlier used during the period of prescription. So this is where it gets, this is where the crux of the issue is inside OPV. Prescription requires a time period in which to prove it. So theoretically, the municipalities would get to pick a 5-year period within which they would say, this is the period that during which we developed our water right, whatever that 5-year period is. The overliers would be able to say, well, okay, you could take water, but you couldn't take the water I was using. So to the extent that the prescriptors develop a right, the overliers develop an offsetting right. That's called the right of self-help. So you have prescription and you have self-help. Now what's left becomes the pool that's remaining and available for the beneficial use of the overliers who were not able to prove what they used during the prescriptive period. So all of this is pretty well laid out if you have prescription. And if you don't have prescription, then you have this doctrine of correlative rights that says everybody has a right to equal access, but nobody has a superior right to one another. And under those circumstances, you have what I would characterize as some kind of a negotiated settlement wherein we all agree on how to divide. But I think for our purposes, we have to assume prescription. And once we assume prescription, we have a very set process of how the water gets divided. And staff's plan conforms to that process. The OPV plan does not conform to that process. And one of the fundamentals in the law is that you can't redistribute water. So whatever the overliers protected during the prescriptive period becomes their quantified amount of water. You can't say, well, there's two pools. There's a M&I pool and there's an ag pool. And in that ag pool is the self-help amount of water that the overliers protected, plus there's whatever is remaining. You can just aggregate that up and redivide it how you want. The overliers are entitled to their amount of historical use, their self-help, during the prescriptive period.
You said that plan does do it,
Yeah.
but which plan are you referring to as that plan?
The staff plan sticks to the historical process and the prescriptive rights and the way the law is written.
Okay.
The OPV plan redistributes.
I want to make sure.
I was explaining this to a family group of landowners, and I said, the OPV plan is something like every one of you up there on the boards, somebody's saying, let's play a game, we'll call it fairness. And we're going to everybody take the money that's in your wallet, put it on the table, and Supervisor Bennett will add it up, and he'll redistribute it equally. And the guy that put the most water the most money in the pot is going to say, well, wait a minute, that's not fairness. And then the other people will say, well, how about I give you half your money back? And that's the OPV hybrid plan. And from my perspective, everybody keeps the money they have. They take the cut that they're required to take, and that's consistent with the law. To the extent that we have some situations where in the OPV plan, we're transferring water from high water users to low water users, I would also say we are transferring water from high water reporters to low water use reporters. And if among those reporters are people who used more water and didn't report it, then that would be the real height of insult. So I understand you're getting a water attorney, and I look forward to him weighing in, because I think this is much clearer than it's made out to be. And if we just stick within those parameters, we'll be fine. Just, leave the creativity behind. Leave behind your idea of fairness, because fairness is the most undefined word in the dictionary. Your idea of fairness and my idea of fairness and Arnie's idea of fairness, all going to be different. The law has looked at this for 100 years, and they've defined what's fairness, so let's stick with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Alton?
Good afternoon, Board. My name is Alden Broom with Broom Ranches. Don't worry, I'm not another guy in a plaid shirt who's going to explain water law to you. But I want to echo, and we are glad that you're getting a water attorney and that you'll have this sort of evaluated independently. I just want to echo what Jared said.
Could you speak right into the mic?
Yeah.
We'd like to hear every word you're saying.
Okay, thank you. Is this better?
Yes, thank you.
I just want to echo what Mr. Bouchard said. We do want your feedback and your comments and direction on where we go with this, the differences that have been outlined clearly by staff. Because we're busy at work, we're still scheduling our meetings, but we need some focus if there are certain items like If you want us to address, Mr. Gramkow's argument, we can do that. If you want us to address, something that's not clear with respect to surface water, we can do that. So I don't know what the process will be, or how you see it working. Are we going to get feedback from staff? Are we going to get it straight from the board? But if, given the timeline and the focus, we can allocate our resources and our experts in a certain direction, but we want to hear from you on how best to do that. And I just want to add one thing. Jürgen started with his comments as being the law being defined by beneficial use. It's reasonable and beneficial use. And the word reasonable is critical as you evaluate the complex aspects of water law, because it's an adaptable standard and it's an ethical standard. So I think I just want you to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I do have one question for staff.
Go ahead.
As I was listening to the public comments that came up, one thing that did jump in my mind that I was remiss in not articulating was in neither one of the plans, nor have I heard, whereabouts is the North Pleasant Valley desalter and the 4,500 acre feet that is allocated to them based upon prior actions. In the world of the allocation plans, is that 4,500 acre feet coming off the top of the 100, or is it coming out of the M&I pool of the 40%? And can we get clarification as to how that might work in the vision that you're putting together? I haven't seen it in your interim plan. It's out there. I think we have a September deadline on this one before that is written into I don't want to say statute, but our deadline is that we have till September on this issue. So some clarity from you would be greatly appreciated.
Got it. Anyone else?
You're expecting that to come later, right?
Yes, yeah, I don't think he was expecting an answer right now.
He's stumbling.
Have you thought about it yet?
No.
Do you have an answer?
No, I understand. No, we'll bring that back.
Nothing further then. This is a receive and file also.
So moved.
Second?
I'll second. There was a question about what kind of thoughts, et cetera, do we have? I mean, after listening to Mr. Gramkow's presentation, I guess I would turn to the OPV people and say, I appreciate he gave some response about reasonable, but what is there? That's an important thing. It's got to be squared, that issue. And if there's some response to that, that would be one of the things that I would be very interested in. And I guess I'm really looking forward to having that legal attorney get here, also that water rights attorney. Because what I do want to ask him is how much are we doing water rights versus how much are we doing something else as a groundwater sustainability agency. Thank you.
Right, moving on then to item number 7. This is a request by the City of Oxnard with respect to surcharges.
Yes, and I have the wrong item number on my slide, so I apologize for that.
Should we vote on the last motion?
So as a little background, the City of Oxnard exceeded their TEA allocation by 99 acre feet in 2016 and paid a surcharge of a little over $148,000.
That's already been paid?
Yes.
It's not outstanding?
Correct. The city, via their attorney, requested a waiver in the June 28th, that was odd, in a June 28th, 2017 letter to the agency. And staff informed the city that there's been no precedent for just an outright waiver, but in 2 instances the board did consider the use of surcharges to invest in water efficiency or supply projects. One was the Nyland Acres Mutual Water Company, and the other was the Satakoy Country Club. The city submitted a second request in October of last year to use the surcharges to replace 84 construction and hydrant water meters. but staff informed the city that there didn't seem to be a demonstrable water savings to that project, and the city withdrew that request. The city submitted the current request in a February 12th, 2018 letter, and the city's request was to use the surcharges towards its Wainimi Road Phase 2 pipeline project, which is part of the GREAT program, and would provide recycled water to ag customers on the east side of the Oxnard Plain. Currently, they're temporarily using Cayugas's salt management pipeline, and the construction of this new pipeline would allow delivery of an additional 1 million gallons per day. And I did have a typo in my staff report. That's 1,120 acre feet per day or per year. Not 11,000. And the city's construction estimate is about $13 million for the project, which is in the city's CIP fund, and they're scheduled to begin construction in June 2018 through July 2019. I guess I didn't advance with that reboot. We took a look at past board actions, and like I said, there were these two actions. In January 2012, your board conditionally approved a waiver of $206,000 of surcharges owed by Nyland Acres Mutual Water Company, and required that those funds be used to complete meter installations and repair leaking water mains. It was part of a negotiated settlement with Nyland Acres and required proof of the installation. In May of 2016, the Sataquai Country Club came with a request to redirect about $55,000 of surcharges to a turf replacement program at the golf course. Your board rejected the request as it was presented and provided comments to provide guidance that for potentially considering a revised request, and directed staff to return with a revised resolution and revised request with specific guidelines based on board comments. However, Sataquai Country Club subsequently paid those surcharge fees and was not brought back to the board in a revised request. So, to summarize what the board's comments were in 2016, specifically in terms of the Sataquai Country Club request, was recognition that the surcharge penalty was enacted so operators would not pump above allocation, and was concerned that the surcharge might no longer be a disincentive to pump within allocation if entities could just come and say, well, we just want to redirect that into a project. And the board was concerned there'd be a flood of similar requests, and said there needs to be a strict policy to limit such requests. And some of the questions were, and again, this was in terms of the Sataquai request at the time, would the project be implemented if the request was not granted? The project timeline was thought to be too soon. At that time, that was a 2022 project time frame, and the board said there needs to be constraints, and there needs to be a way to validate the project water savings are ultimately achieved. And so if we boil that down in terms of what we discern from the board's direction and then board direction, is that a project should not be part of a normal operation replacement or CIP, but something that would not or could not be funded otherwise. There needs to be an analysis that the project results in a demonstrable reduction in groundwater pumping, at least equal to the amount that was pumped over allocation, and that suspension and waiver of the fees would be contingent upon proof of implementation and achievement of the project objectives within the agreed schedule. So moving on to the current request by the City of Oxnard, it does further board's expressed goals of supporting the GREAT program, and it appears that the project could reduce pumping, but the city is moving forward in construction regardless. And prior to today's meeting, recognizing that the city has asked to withdraw this specific request, they have a different project that they think would much better meet at least the past board's articulated constraints. And so at this time, the city and agency staff request your board's direction on how to move forward with this and potentially future requests of the similar type to either reconfirm what the board articulated in 2016 or direct staff to come back, study it further, and come back to your board. That's really, I think, what we're asking for now that Oxnard's recognized that the project that they did propose probably, well, at least it didn't meet all the criteria that have been articulated in the past. So that's...
So Kim, let me ask, are we being asked to, what if we rejected this proposal, is it basically coming back again, in a different guise?
The city has, and city's attorney, both city attorney and the city's outside counsel are here that can address what they want to do.
I just want a yes or no. I don't want to hear about the next,
right.
I just want a yes or no. Is that your understanding?
Chair West, they have another project that they would like to come back and submit to your board.
I think it would be a good idea for the agency to develop a formal policy, whether it's based on the 2016 discussions or something further. My own perspective is, unless the excess pumping was the result of a casualty loss or some unforeseen and unexpected emergency, I wouldn't waive any surcharge under any circumstances. But that's just my perspective. Having said that, what is the staff asking for today?
Direction.
Could you go back to the previous slide? Thank you.
Oh, that one?
No, the one before that. Thank you. I agree with these if we're going to have such consideration. I know that when I was on the Regional Water Board, we allowed some people's penalties to be used for certain projects that were going to improve the quality of water. And we had a policy under which circumstances that could happen. I don't see anything wrong with a policy. I think this is a good start.
Director West, while I would agree with Director Craven that if we were going to do it, this is a reasonable policy, but I agree with Director West, I just don't think we should do it. This agency is in the middle of tremendous changes. We're going to be doing, hopefully, sustainability fees to be trying to fund projects. And I could see us saying, we have these projects that we've identified as priority projects, and now somebody else comes in and says, well, I'll do this other project, and I want to use our overcharges for that. This agency is going to have tremendous financial challenges, and I think, for me, my direction would be for the next 5 years, we shouldn't be in the business of doing that. So that's where I would go in terms of my direction. Curious what my colleagues think.
Okay, I got a different point of view here for you. This is a unique situation in the fact that the city of Oxnard is and does have the ability to put water out there. Part of this policy is okay, they overdrew, they incurred surcharges, but they do have a source of water that they are developing and they are delivering. Now, if I remember correctly, under the 5-party agreement, you take that water out of your wastewater, highly advanced treated water, you deliver it to customer A, they pay X dollars and trade you a 1-for-1 credit, okay? Something about that. So we have the ability here with this project and this constituent that if they were to deliver that water and someone did not pump it and they did not receive a credit back, That is putting the same value of this water and leaving it in the ground as a conservation measure. No, I don't think it should be just the 96 or 98 acre feet. I think it should be an amount equal to what the 148,000 is. Okay, so if your treatment plant, let me run it like this. If your treatment plant, your highly treated wastewater is $1,300 an acre foot, and you don't get a credit back, this amount divided by 1,300, you deliver that, and that allocation or those credits disappear. I think the agency's ahead. We've put water, we've left water in the ground. They've been able to put the money to use, and it is an amount that is high enough and greater than what was drawn out.
I am sympathetic to your argument, and I like it, but I am also think policy should remain consistent. And in terms of backpedaling on surcharges, I think does disincentivize our conservation efforts. Is there another way that we could help with this project? We had a grant program in effect for a while. That has been terminated, I think.
I don't want to see surcharges become an alternate means of project financing.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what this is going to lead to.
I would like to see GMA help City of Oxnard with this problem.
I would offer, I have no objection to that either. If when we rank them, this is the one we want to fund, fine. But that's the other way around is it's just they come in, you lose, but don't do that and give up the disincentives that the surcharge has.
I agree. Yeah. The policy, I think, needs to stay consistent, but even perhaps in arrears, they go ahead and build the pipeline and they could apply after the fact even. I would be even amenable to that after it was already in the ground.
But if they continue to receive a 1-for-1, then there's no actual water savings. That's the crux, is that in the 5-party agreement, there is a 1-for-1 and dollars. It's a reduced rate in order for them to cash. It's a liability against the aquifer that's going to be cashed later on. So where's the actual savings?
Can I ask you, then why are we hitting them with the surcharge at all?
Well, given the current circumstances that we have in place, there is no reasonable means for them to be able to withdraw any of those credits. They're building a bank. They're taking a risk that someday down the line, given the current conditions, it might be a while before they can access them.
My question is, why hit them with a surcharge then?
Because overpumping gets a surcharge.
They're overpumping, so you're hitting them with the surcharge. You have a pumping number that you're trying to get them to stay under.
Mm-hmm. I get that, but this $148,000 is a Cayugas imported rate tier 2. So it is significantly larger than what the cost was they incurred to pump. There's the penalty effect. And it is higher than the replacement water that they would be leaving in the ground or offsetting.
But they knew that when they were pumping it. They knew that was the consequence of pumping it.
Yeah.
And if somebody wants to bring that convoluted whole thing to us and say, okay, change the policy and quit charging them surcharges.
Oh, no,
I'll
I
have
don't want
that.
to quit charging.
Well, I'm saying, I'll have that conversation, but I don't want to mess the conversation up with surcharge disincentives. That's my own thought, but I mean, it's just one vote, but I'm trying to listen to this, and that's what's not squaring in my head.
I'm not trying to advocate eliminating surcharges or reducing them by any means. If anything, I think they might be a little bit too low, but I'm looking at this district's responsibility for conservation and keeping water in the ground, and how do we accomplish that versus where the $140,000 or $150,000 may end up going to something that's not as effective.
Any other questions?
Just for the benefit of staff, I know we still have to hear from the public, but I think, I don't know if you're still, I think three of us are in the position of saying, and I don't know Charlotte, I think Charlotte's saying if we're going to have a policy, she wants this. I don't know if you want a policy, but I think three of us are saying we don't want to have a policy right now, at least. of returning surcharges to people to use them for projects.
I'm in agreement with that.
Yeah, I know we got Oxnard people that want to talk to us.
Okay, any comments or questions from the public, from the general public? Feel free.
Yeah, Omar Castro, Water Division Manager for the City of Oxnard. Chairman West, one of the things that you mentioned was if there was a failure that took place that you would understand, and that's exactly what took place. We lost our desalter for our groundwater production, and that was at the end of our water year, and the only thing that we can do at that time was continue to pump. We knew that this was going to happen, but we had no other means other than to continue to get another resource to supply water. So there was
You have access to state water, do you not?
I'm sorry?
You have access to state water, do you not?
We have access to state water, but we also have to have blending to meet certain water quality criteria.
The point is that wasn't your only source.
We could have, at that point, looked at how we can purchase more state water.
And so instead, you're asking this agency to forego surcharges because of the business decision Oxnard made.
With respect, Chair West, my name is Sherry Kleem. I'm the Assistant City Attorney, and we're not asking the board to forego the surcharges. We're asking for essentially an in lieu kind of arrangement where we offer something. Now,
you're asking the board to essentially forego collecting surcharges to allow you to build a project you're going to build no matter what we do.
So,
right?
Well, I can tell you that this is the first time, when this report was posted, is the first time that our city has heard these three items.
I didn't ask you about those. I had a very specific question. Am I correct that you're asking this agency to forego receipt of surcharges to allow you to build a project that you're going to build no matter what we do? Isn't that correct?
To build a regional water project, yes.
Okay, thank you.
With respect to these, it seems like your concern is that the project's already going to be built, and I think that that's one of the criteria that was raised.
I'll just add, Chair West and members of the board, appreciate the time.
Could you speak into the...
My name's Stephen O'Neill. I'm Special Counsel for the City of Oxnard on some of their water issues. And just to go to the policy discussion that's taken place, Director Craven is absolutely right. This is a policy that's in place at an enforcement level all across the state. I've negotiated many of these types of in lieu settlements with the regional boards to affect an environmentally beneficial project instead of that money going and sitting in the regional board's coffers. And in this situation, the city is trying its best to meet what we have in the sense of an undefined set of criteria that this board has implemented in the past. And now, for the first time, we know what those criteria are, and we have a project that we think will fit into that criteria and bring a benefit to the region in the sense of keeping water in the ground. And I know that that's this agency's charge, and this project would certainly promote that in a very efficient, expedient way without having to go through a GSP process, without having to go through the delay. I mean, it's something that we can get done quickly and effectively. And we'd urge the board's consideration at a minimum to come back if the board decides to adopt some criteria to give us a chance to meet the criteria that's been developed. And
the way this comes before the board is to consider a request to invest surcharges in some project. If what you're telling me is that you don't want to make that request at this time, then that simplifies part of what the board has to do.
I defer to the city attorney.
Okay.
What we've asked, like I said, we did not make this request, okay? We put in the letter making the request in response to the first criteria, the second criteria, which is the only one that we were aware of. Does it actually create a demonstrable reduction in groundwater pumping that's at least equal to the amount that was pumped? That was the one and only requirement that we were made aware of, in which case we recommended this project. The reason that we're now, as of Monday, when we saw this item on this board agenda, and we read this and realized they might have 3 criteria, or they're considering 3 criteria, then we'd like to, play ball. We'd like to do what it is that you would like us to do and give you an offer for a project or some sort of suggestion that would meet all 3 criteria or whatever criteria you deem fit.
So it sounds to me that you recognize that the proposal that perhaps preceded the publication of the board packet may not meet the criteria, and you want an opportunity to amend the proposal and come back?
Again.
If those are the criteria, then yes.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that there has not yet been a formal policy. This is the criteria that's been used to evaluate requests in the past. Understanding that, if you want to come back with a new proposal, I don't think anybody would have an objection to that. However, I think part of the direction that staff has asked for is what the board would like to see, and I think we'd like to see something in the nature of a policy document that could become permanent that we could evaluate and adopt if necessary.
Well, if I could, there are a lot of different cross currents going here. One, if your project, if you incurred the surcharges because of a complication, so you knew you had to incur the surcharges. One, I hope we have an appeal process that people can go into if there's some compelling reason. I think there is, and if there isn't,
I think this is it.
Well,
I think they go to the board, the executive.
I thought they went to the executive director first to find out, but I don't know whether that's the case. But if there was some reason, there was, because of the Thomas fire and you had to save somebody's life, you ended up over pumping, I suppose there would be some way that we would consider that. Again, I'm trying to separate, so I'm sympathetic that if I'd be willing to listen to that, okay? Where we are right now, though, is Oxnard has already pulled this proposal, so it's not about this proposal any longer. Oxnard's pulled it, and the question is, I don't think, in my mind, I'm not asking staff to come back with criteria. I can appreciate the attorney from Oxnard saying, these are your criteria, and so we've got something we think we could come back with. It's just, these are really not these criteria have never been adopted by this body. This is staff's summary of sort of informal conversations we've had when we denied the other project more than it is, this is what we're looking for. And I'm just trying to be upfront with you guys to say, I would encourage you not to waste your time if, in fact, the majority of the board is saying, we just don't want to do this right now. So that's where I am at this point in time. That doesn't mean I don't want to hear about your project. If you got a project that can, fast, quick, start getting groundwater saved, bring that project, and I would consider funding it, just funding it. But I wouldn't consider doing it with the surcharge because of the impact it could have on the disincentives program. That's my own, and I'm just one of 5 people up here, but that's how I see it at this point.
Help me remember, because it seems way in the past, and yet there's certain things that happened in January that seem way in the past to me too. So, do we still have a grant program? I don't remember looking at grants in a long time.
I don't, but I know we have an open agenda, and somebody could come with a proposal and say, I think this is a good idea, and we could sit down and decide whether we want to fund it or we don't want to fund it, or whether we want to create a grant program for it, or we want it to compete. I'm not trying to encourage you, because I think everybody's going to want to come with their projects, but that's how I would do your project. I wouldn't do your project with surcharge. That's the only thing I'm saying. I wouldn't do it with surcharge. I would do it on the basis of all of the projects out there. And if you say, hey, there's some reason why this one could happen quickly, but we need this to happen right away. If somebody says it costs X amount of money, I'd go yes or no. And one of the criteria might be, we're not really doing grants right now, but that's my thinking on this.
Mr. Chair, if I could respond briefly, two things. I'd just like the board to take notice. This is not an agency that has a history of exceedances. This was a one-time event, and this agency is requesting the same consideration that was given the other two requests that were considered and granted, in one case granted by the board.
Okay, let me jump in. First of all, we can't determine what the criteria are because we don't have criteria on the agenda. We can't say absolutely no more relief from penalties because relief from penalties isn't on the agenda except in one specific case. So if we're going to make that decision, it's got to come back as a policy decision on another agenda, as I see it. And if we're going to make a decision on criteria, we can give staff direction to come back with these things or with other things or with nothing, but that's going to have to be at another meeting too. Personally, I'm willing to hear at another meeting because we have one specific request from the city of Oxnard in our packet, and that has been withdrawn, as Kim said, but I am certainly willing to, for me, listen to what their current request is and an explanation of the terms under which they felt they were forced to overpump. If it was some extraordinary condition.
My suggestion is, if you have another request that you want to make, that you do that in writing. The process, as I understand it, is the request is first made to the executive director. The executive director passes on it, and if the relief requested isn't granted, you have the opportunity then present it to the board. I would follow that process with respect to any further requests. Since this request has been withdrawn, I don't think it's appropriate for the board to act on it or to even listen to an explanation for it at this point. It's pointless because we're going to have to hear it again if and when it comes back. And as far as the other element of the agendized item was to give direction to staff, I think you've probably heard enough from us in terms of, what our perspectives are with respect to both these criteria, and the other slide that preceded this was the factors that informed that criteria. Anyone else? Any other questions, comments?
Just want to thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Hearing none, I guess we can move on then to the executive officer's report. Is there a motion to receive and file?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
That's the last item on the agenda. We're adjourned. Thank you very much.